America's Winter season comes to an epic conclusion as we crown a champion. 8 of the top Hearthstone players from the Americas have gathered in Hollywood, California to dust off their best decks and duel until only one player remains. The winner earns a spot at the Hearthstone World Championship, the $25,000 first place prize, and of course, bragging rights. Whose preparation, passion, and belief in the heart of the cards will lead them to victory? Pull up a chair and find out as the 2016 Hearthstone America's Winter Championship begins.
Well met, and welcome to Day 2 of the Hearthstone Championship Tour, America's Winter Championship. I'm Robert Worthingwing, joined at the desk for the first time this weekend by TJ Sanders and Raynad. Guys, how you doing here on Day 2 of the America's Winter Championship?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to another day of games. Yesterday we saw, some pretty cool decks come out. We saw some bold lineups from some of the players, and I'm looking to see how the groups pan out today.
Yeah, it's a lot of great, memorable games yesterday. A lot of cool comebacks and just really great matches. So hopefully we see more of that today, and I'm excited to see some of the more unique decks played again on stream.
Right, Day 1 was definitely a tale of the good, the bad, and the confusing plays. So looking forward to seeing more of that today as well. We will be teasing a new card from the Whispers of the Old God set announced yesterday. So stick around and look forward to that. But for now, let's talk about all the action we saw. And actually, rather than talk about it, let's show people at home who maybe didn't get the chance to see it a short video recapping all of the action from Day 1.
Day 1 of the Hearthstone America's Winter Championship kicked off as 8 of the top players from the Americas gathered in Hollywood, California to battle out in 2 group stages for a chance to advance toward the title. In our first match of the tournament, we saw Team Dignitas Chalky face off against the Open Tournament champ Nostam. Chalky went into the series confidently, feeling that his tournament experience and finely tuned lineup would give him the edge. As the games began, however, Nostam's consistent in-game pressure forced Chalky to make unfavorable trades in game after game, overtaking Chalky's aggressive decks and earning himself the first slot in the upper half of Group A. In our second series, confident Canadian Talion battled against the 15-year-old Hearthstone prodigy Amnesiac. Amnesiac brought a fairly unique lineup, including a decision to run the polarizing Murloc Paladin. Amnesiac's forward-thinking plays and deck innovations paid off in spades, countering Talion's handlock and earning 2 quick wins. Talion clawed his way back into the series with some tough comeback wins in 2 unfavored matches. In a hard-fought final match, Amnesiac's patience finally paid off to take down Talion's Control Warrior, bumping the young competitor into the winner's match. In the third series of the day, fan and celebrity met in a showdown as 21-year-old Al Skyhigh faced off against his favorite streamer, WTY Bill. Despite their history as practice partners, the two had set their friendship aside as they battled in the first upper bracket slot in Group B. Bill began the series showcasing the perfected control style his stream fans have come to expect of him, efficiently earning 2 wins with Freeze Mage and Control Warrior. Things took a turn for the unexpected with Bill's third deck choice, an old-school Ramp Druid with few cards that rarely see tournament play.
Sen'jin Shieldmaster.
I knew it!
It's 2014, and we're back with Sen'jin Shieldmaster.
Oh, I love it so much.
WTY Bill took a big risk, and this time it didn't pay off. Al Skyhigh's technical plays took down Bill's Druid the next 3 games in a row, completing a reverse sweep and moving Al Skyhigh into the winner's match.
Sky High takes it.
Sky High completes the reverse sweep on Bill, and what a series.
The student has become the master.
Day 1 reaches epic conclusion between 2 underdog players. Chess Dude, a chess prodigy playing in his first major tournament, against the Argentinian player Snail, the only tavern hero and the only player from Latin America to make it to the Winter Championship. Nerves and passion were on full display throughout the games as each player navigated tricky matchups and tough decisions.
Just then that Lothar would not be going to face it. Wheelhouse Manastormer, that's lethal right there with the Death Spite.
Ultimately, Snail's aggressive style overpowered Chess Dude's combo lineup and earned him a spot in the Group B's winners match. Now Day 2 begins as 4 of our players face elimination and fight for their tournament lives as the Hearthstone America's Winter Championship continues.
Greetings, travelers, and welcome to the sidebar here in the Hearthstone Tavern. My name is Sotul, joined here by Cora Songbird Georgiou on the desk. And throughout the day, we will be digging deep into some of the game-defining plays, really trying to explain the decision-making that goes into some of these players' thought processes.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and break down, analyze some interesting plays after every match that you guys are going to see today, give you just a little bit more of an in-depth look at what the players' decision-making process is. But first, let's take a look at the schedule for today. Coming up first, we've got the winner's bracket from Group A match, Nostam versus Amnesiac. After that winner's bracket, Group B is Al Sky High versus Snail. Dropping down to the lower bracket, Group A, Chalky taking on the Canadian player Talion. And the Group B lower bracket is going to be WTY Bill versus Chess Dude.
Right, and important to note that every game today has something on the line. These players are either playing for qualification to the top 4 or for elimination. So you can see exactly how this is working in Group A. Nostam and Amnesiac both successful in their round 1 matches. Chucky and Talion unsuccessful, drop down into the lower bracket. And looking at Group B, Al Sky High and Snail, 2 upsets found their way through, you'd have to say, into the upper bracket. And Group B, lower bracket, made up of WTY Bill and Chess Dude. Bill probably the favorite overall for that group, so he's going to have to fight back from the lower bracket now.
We're going to go ahead and toss it to Frodan over on the fireside to give you guys a little bit more of a breakdown on the HCT format.
Thank you very much, Cora and Sato. That's right. I am here on the fireside part of the tavern from our Hollywood, California studios, where the players will be playing their matches for either advancing to the top 4 or being sent home early. Every single game today will have major impact on their future of potentially becoming the America champion. Now, we do recognize that not everybody's been able to tune in throughout the entire championship tour. In fact, some people may have missed the announcement yesterday, and maybe today you're piling in early to see maybe the new reveal of the old Whispers of the Gods cards. I'm looking forward to see what we're going to be able to see there, but in the meantime, let's catch you up on how we got to this point. The players have to qualify through either ranked play or getting to the firesides and becoming a tavern hero. From there, we put them into a bracket of over 128 players, and in the end, 8 of them qualified to the regional finals here, once again, in the Hollywood studios. They'll be playing a best-of-5 conquest format with 1 ban. If you're not familiar with that format, don't worry, you'll get caught up pretty soon. Very straightforward. At its core, all you need to do is win once with each deck in a blind pick stage. From there, we just want to remind you guys to stay engaged in the conversation. Hashtag HCT will be featuring tweets during the broadcast. As you might notice in the top right of your screen, you can see those tweets again on Twitter or Facebook. Go to @PlayHearthstone and let us know your thoughts, whether you're watching along with us or some of your favorite moments. Let's go over to the caster desk and get ready for our first match of the day, as I believe we're ready for day 2 here at the Hearthstone Americas Championship.
Thank you, Dan. And we're not going to waste any time. We're going to get right in that first match of the day. First player from Grand National Championship, or Grand National Champions, it's Nostam.
Yeah, Nosam had a pretty great performance yesterday, winning his first matchup, and he's a prominent open tournament player, and he streams, and when he streams, he tends to play some crazy decks, and he's here to prove that he's not just a wacky guy, but also a formidable tournament player.
Well, speaking of formidable, his opponent for this first match will be the 15-year-old Hearthstone whiz kid from Team Archon, it's Amnesiac.
Amnesiac is a hyper-confident player, and he actually brought a really bold lineup to this tournament, including Murloc Paladin and Oil Rogue. So I'm really excited to see how that pans out through the rest of the weekend.
Right, so he, as you mentioned, he brought kind of that different lineup, and he's very much of the mind that his lineup is not necessarily weaker than anybody else's so much as he just plays it better. Andre, do you agree with his lineup choices?
I mean, it's definitely interesting, right? We saw the Anyfin Paladin coming out, which is definitely a deck a lot of people didn't expect at this tournament, but it worked out well for him, and I mean, I think his lineup is solid. I'd like to see more of it.
Right. Obviously, TJ, you know a lot about Nosam's lineup. You've been hanging out with him a lot over the course of the weekend, him and Chalky as well, who have still remained very close even after Nostam upset Chalky. What do you think Nostam's lineup compares to Amnesiac's?
I think Nosam's lineup is actually really strong as opposed to Amnesiac. I was talking to him last night, and he was struggling to find out what deck that he was going to ban. And when you're in the Conquest format and you're struggling to find the best ban, that usually means it's a good sign for you, because it usually means that all your matchups are pretty close. And he's got some really good matchups, and I think that he's coming into this match with more confidence than he's probably used to.
Right, Nosam should have some confidence after beating Chalky. Obviously, a huge accolade in this tournament. A lot of players were afraid to face him going in, but we want to know who you at home have winning this. So hashtag your tweets HCT and hashtag Nostam or hashtag Amnesiac, and let us know what you think. This is, I would have to say, probably the match I'm most looking forward to over the course of the day. 2 of the most well-known players of this tournament in the Western scene. So, Raynad, who do you got?
Oof. My money's on Nostam. That's what I would say. I mean, he had a pretty dominant performance yesterday. Seemed like he was comfortable with his decks. Really knew how to play them. We didn't see any mistakes that I noticed. Yeah, just seems to be playing very solid, consistent lineup. So.
Right, Nosam had said earlier on that he wasn't necessarily sure that the decks he brought he maneuvered or piloted the best, but he obviously won that. TJ, what do you think?
These two are probably the two players that played the best yesterday out of the entire 8. So it's really hard to call, but just based off lineups alone, I think that I'd go with Nostam.
Right, well, for game 1, we're going to get it started with the good old-fashioned Druid Mirror.
Oh, yes.
And we see Nostam has the 2 Wild Growths, which are pretty good. Reynad, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a matchup that is really the most important aspect of this matchup really is the opening hands, right? So for Nostam, he's got coin, and that can be a good thing if your hand kind of curves well with it. In this case, he's got the 2 Wild Growths and Druid of the Claw. So in a lot of cases, you only want to keep 1 Wild Growth, but when you have that 5-drop, you can coin Wild Growth turn 1, play another Wild Growth turn 2, and that gives you a turn 3 Druid of the Claw and a huge head start on mana. So wouldn't be surprised to see him keep everything here except the Savage Roar. And on Amnesiac's side, he's probably going to mulligan a lot more aggressively, I think, and try to find some of that ramp that he's missing.
Right, is there generally a difference in what you mulligan for when you're without the coin as the Druid player?
It basically changes the minions that you keep. If you're going first, the 4-drop is a little bit more attractive if you have the Wild Growth, whereas if you have coin, you're more likely to keep like a 5-drop.
Right. Shade of Naxxramas, we see 2 of them in Amnesiac's hand now. This is a really powerful card in the Druid Mirror. TJ, want to explain why?
The Shade of Naxxramas, just because over time it grows and it can be a sticky target on the board where you can use for Savage Roar later on in the game, but Nosam goes ahead and only keeps 1 Wild Growth, and sometimes in this matchup, even though it can be really good to ramp up quickly and get to those big threats before your opponent, it's also good to have consistency, because if you miss a turn of dropping a threat and your opponent hits that turn of dropping a threat, you fall really far behind. And also Nostam, both players you see held onto their mulligans for the entire time, because Nosam's more likely to keep double Wild Growth if his opponent throws away all of his cards, because he knows that his opponent is really searching for some ramp, and that way he's more guaranteed to drop a Druid of the Claw without an answer from his opponent.
Right, that is something that's kind of a hidden layer of strategy that maybe most players don't necessarily take into consideration, is watching your opponent's mulligans, what they keep, kind of knowing those ideal cards per deck, per archetype that they want to be keeping. And I like the read on that. We see double Shade of Naxxramas on the board, and Nosam's hand, he had that Wild Growth. He's curved out very nicely into that 4-drop, into the 5-drop. So for Amnesiac, how long do you keep these Shredders hidden for? Or do you think it's more one of those things where you have to start using them to just start clearing the board?
Well, if you're Amnesiac here, that's your win condition, right? You're missing out on that ramp. You're not happy to see that opening hand, and Nosam did start off in a Wild Growth. So Amnesiac knows that his curve's going to be a little bit weaker. So his entire game plan is going to be, first of all, don't die to the combo out of Nostam's side. Use these shades to trade if you have to. But also, if the opportunity is there to kind of hold off on them for a while, use them to end the game from maybe even 30 life points, he's going to want to take that route. But at this point, he's just so far behind on board, I expect Amnesiac kind of has to trade to just stay alive.
Yeah, and usually that's how it works out in the Druid versus Druid Mirror. There's usually one player who's the aggressor, and there's one player who's sort of the defender. And it's all sort of predicated on the aggressor being the one to draw into the combo in time to support their early game lead. But it's really hard for Druids to come back on the board when they fall behind, because they lack hard removal. Druid creatures in general don't line up that well with other Druids' removal. Swipe and Wrath don't really do well against a Piloted Shredder or a Druid of the Claw or an Ancient of Lore. Right, so usually the aggressor is the one that comes out ahead.
We are going to see Amnesiac go ahead and break up that Force of Nature Savage Roar combo in his hand. He's going to play down that Savage Roar, start using it as Reynad said, start clearing the board and making it just a lot less dangerous, although he's already put himself down to 16. Nostam has a minion on board, the Amani Berserker, so yeah, minion's going to go away, but again, it's 16. He's already so low in this matchup.
Yeah, Amnesiac's aware that this makes him vulnerable to that swipe, but he recognizes that he's behind, he's missing on ramp, he was behind on board. This is a risk he had to take, but Nostam is going to punish it here.
Yeah, and as the Druid, you're okay with putting yourself in the mirror matchup into a swipe play, because you know that if your opponent swipes, they're most likely also not developing a threat. So the mirror matchup is one of the matchups where you can play into it the most, just because if you are the one who drops the threat first on the board, if you're the one who is proactive on the board before your opponent, you can usually leverage that into an advantage.
So the reason Nosam's thinking here, even though he knows he's going to swipe, is he's considering whether to coin the Keeper of the Growth to just get some more board presence or to save that coin. If he saves the coin, he's going to have 8 mana next turn plus the coin, which opens up Azure Drake plus a second swipe, which is a pretty powerful effect against a likely turn 7 play from Amnesiac, which is Ancient of Lore. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him just swipe hero power here rather than coining out a Keeper of the Grove.
Yeah.
It looks like, yeah, he's going to go ahead and, well, he's actually got the coin there, so it looks like the Keeper of the Grove is going to come out to finish off the Shade and Axe Armor there. Amnesiac is now sub 14 health, so unless he heals, and he'd have to use Ancient of Lore to do so, if Nostam comes into owning the combo, the Druid combo, the Force of Nature Savage Roar, Amnesiac's just done.
Yeah, I do like Maynard's line there because you're going into turn 7, and you know the most likely play on turn 7 from a Druid is going to be Ancient of Lore. So keeping the coin for Azure Drake swipe seems like it would be, you know, a more enticing option. But this does put a body on the board, which, you know, it gives you sort of initiative, even though it's a weak body.
Right, so we see the Wild Growth come out there, as opposed to Hero Power, which technically would give him more effective health. Do you like the Wild Growth over the Hero Power there, Reynad?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. It enables him to play Azure Drake, Piloted Shredder next turn, which is a play he otherwise wouldn't have access to. And a lot of times the Druid Mirror is just so quick, you don't really have time to cycle it in the late game. But yeah, it looks like Nostam does opt to play Ancient of Lore here. He had the option to go with the Azure Drake Wrath and kill the Druid of the Claw with spell power. So it was definitely a tough decision here. But he is just going to go with Lore. When you have 2 7-drops in your hand, it's easy to kind of not have time to play both of them. So I like him getting that card out while he can.
Yeah, the big thing here is that Nostam has such a lead on health. So he can take turns where he's, you know, making really defensive plays and just trying to take control of the board and remove as much as Amnesiacs as possible, just because he can just buy time for the rest of the game to draw into combo. And he already sees that Amnesiac has used one of his combos, which is something that you are really happy with in the Druid Mirror, because you know that's not a combo they're going to have later on in the game to burst you down.
Amnesiac recognized that he's behind on board. He's just going to run his cards out there to take some control of the board as best as he can. But this Spell Power swipe is just going to destroy that board so effectively. It's definitely
Amnesiac, I was going to say, Amnesiac's definitely very behind here now. He's pretty much just going to have to throw down minions, hope something sticks. But seeing that many cards in Nosam's hand, Concede comes out, and Nosam is going to take the game. He's going to go up 1-0 in the series. And that matchup is such a swingy one. And as you said right now, I'm inclined to agree. The opening hand usually dictates so much of how that game goes. And we saw Nostam jump ahead early. He got out that Shredder, and he had all those mid-game minions that he wanted. And Amnesiac was constantly put in a place where he had to make suboptimal plays. So not really surprised to see the outcome there.
Yeah, I mean, the games involving the Druid class are very, very quick. So when you're having 2 players that are this good playing at this level and they have great deck lists, what's going to decide the winner a lot of times is that opening hand.
See, Nosam actually chose to ban out Amnesiac's Any Fin Can Happen deck, and Amnesiac banned out the Shaman deck for Nosam. What do you make of banning out Any Fin there? Is that a deck that he was particularly weak to?
Well, I talked about it a little bit earlier. There's not a great ban for Nostam against Amnesiac's lineup.
Right.
All of his matchups are pretty close, and the ones that aren't close, he has other decks that don't do as well. So in that situation, you sort of have to predict what your opponent's going to ban, and then like look at the statistics really in depth. And I know Nostam had some help from his team and his friends looking at that, and they determined that Murloc Paladin was probably the one that was going to give him the toughest time, especially considering that he figured Amnesiac wouldn't ban his Control Warrior, which is one of the weaker matchups for that deck.
Right, and as we look at that social media poll we have going, Nostam is actually the player voted to beat Amnesiac. So I think that would be something of an upset if it were to happen. Amnesiac is certainly one of the top players in North America, routinely finishes top legend, very confident player. So glad to see Nosam's friends out there voting for him. We actually had the chance to talk to Nosam about shifting from being more of that kind of variety entertainer, streaming those wacky decks, and becoming more of a serious competitor. So let's take a minute to hear what he had to say.
My in-game name's really cute. It's just going to be my last name backwards, and it was some pretty clever stuff. I am a streamer, and I think my stream is actually different than most people's stream. I'm just hanging out in a call with friends while playing the game, so it's like more of a casual environment where people just come and watch me and my friends. I initially got a little bit popular because I played against Trump on his stream, and I was playing these like just absolutely stupid decks.
Whoa! Got him.
A lot of times I feel like people don't give me enough respect just because I have that reputation as someone who just plays a lot of dumb decks. I definitely want to show people that I can play at the top level with the rest of them. The first tournament that I played in was a TESPA event, and up until that point I was just taking the game very casually, and I ended up qualifying for it. So after that point, I thought I could, travel because of this game, and I began to take it a lot more seriously. And I've been around in the competitive scene for a while. I've been one of the most successful open tournament players. I've qualified for, this is my 3rd LAN now, which is pretty rare for someone to say that isn't like a pro player. I'm one of the most consistent open tournament players, and this weekend I plan to take home that first big tournament win.
Nosam looking to score that big, got him against Amnesiac, and being up 1-0 is going to help him get there. So, TJ, as someone who, we've talked, and you're, obviously a fantastic caster, but you're looking to, TJ, you are a fantastic caster. You're obviously looking to transition to being more of a serious competitive player, What's it like to go out there and grind those open tournaments, trying to get to the point where you are one of the bigger, more well-known players?
It's really tough. There's a lot of great players, Nosam being one of them, and he's one of the people that I practice with and I talk with a lot in strategy for open tournaments. But it gives you so much practice,
right?
And it really does translate over. I mean, there's a lot of players who got their start playing through open tournaments, players like Tice, Oskaka. Those guys all started playing through opens, qualifying for these events, and it's a really tough grind, but it really helps. And the tournament that he was referring to, the TESPA tournament, was the largest open tournament in Hearthstone's history. It was over 3,000 people in one single elimination open bracket, and he made it to the top 2. So that was his start in Hearthstone. So he really set the pace for his career, I suppose.
Right, being able to succeed in a single elimination tournament is obviously a huge thing. Those are very dicey, but hopping into game 2 here, we are going to see Nostam on that very removal heavy warrior against Amnesiac's Druid. So this was a matchup we were saying where the mid-range Druid is generally favored against the traditional control warrior, but this warrior is a little bit different. So Reynad, how do you see this matchup?
Yeah, well, this type of warrior list has a lot more ways to interact with the early board and the pressure from Druid, whereas the more traditional control warrior decks, you see a lot more big minions to end the game, things like Alexstrasza, Ysera, Dr. Boom. This type of warrior deck cuts back on those. You see more cards like Bash, occasionally Deathlord, just more Slam, like ways to deal with Druid's early minions. So while this Warriors matchup is better against Druid than the older Warrior decks, I would still heavily favor Amnesiac in this matchup. It's a lot of things have to go right in the way of Warrior in order to overcome the Druid's opening hands. And in the mid game, if the Druid does draw like one Ancient of Lore or an Azure Drake and keep cycling through cards, a lot of times you're just in danger of dying to that combo as the Warrior, and it forces you to make suboptimal plays where you armor up a little more than you'd like to.
This is one of the harder matchups for Druids to play because you have to sort of be smart about how you play your threats. You don't want to overextend into Brawl. You have to know what kind of warrior you're playing against to play around the removal as best as possible. And there are some cards that I know Nosam has been playing around with and a lot of warrior innovators have been playing around with to make the matchup better against Druid. One of them being Doomsayer, playing like a tempo Doomsayer, a proactive Doomsayer. Against a Druid, it can be a big strength, especially if you're lacking removal in your hand. So just some interesting things. This is one of the, the matchups that have stood the test of time, that's been around for a really long time in competitive Hearthstone.
Right, and we see there, Nosam's opening hand has a lot of those cards that allow this warrior deck to cycle, which is a big deal, always having cards. And when Chalky was actually playing this matchup yesterday with his own mid-range Druid, we saw Chalky never got around to drawing that Ancient of Lore to be able to have the extra cards in hand, and the warrior actually kind of outvalued the Druid, so be interesting to see if Amnesiac can get a hold of those cards early. We see the Azure Drake in hand, which is good for him.
Yeah, there's a lot of subtle plays that a less experienced warrior player might not make in this matchup. You can see Nostam, instead of armoring turn 2, he just played his War Axe without having a target to attack with it right away. So he knows that his mana is very, very valuable in the early game. The Druid's minions are very big. They're going to be accelerated out a little faster than usual. So you're going to need all of your mana to basically be able to keep up against the Druid and try to build up your own board if possible.
Yeah, it's a really good point because that turn he would have, had to play the Fireworks for 2 mana if he hadn't played it last turn, and he wouldn't have enough mana to put out the proactive threat of the Elite Starseeker. So,
well, Amnesiac committing a couple of resources to this Deathlord, and Deathlord is a minion that can actually give Druids troubles. Ooh, that is a minion right there that can give Warrior trouble.
Yeah, so in my opinion, Shade and Exramus is the best tool the Druid has against Warrior because it's just so hard to interact with. The only way that Warrior can deal with that Shade before it builds up and ends up killing the Warrior with a combo is by having a lot of minions on the board and playing a Brawl and having it die. And it's just a very inconvenient, inefficient play to have to make just to deal with one 3-drop minion. Because if that Shade keeps living, eventually it's going to threaten lethal against the Warrior.
Yeah, then on the other side, as the Druid, it's the game of when to reveal your Shade.
Yeah.
You have to have really good game sense to know when the Warrior is setting up for a brawl or is about to brawl. And getting that damage in, preemptively before you think a brawl is going to happen is, a big thing that separates, experienced Druid players in this matchup to less experienced ones.
Right, we do see Nosam chose to play that Acolyte of Pain. So if Amnesiac wants to, he can just get a clear one trade, not even a trade really, but just get rid of that Acolyte of Pain, ensure it only draws one card. But as a Druid player in this matchup, do you think you probably have to be applying more pressure?
Well, you have to think how many keeper targets there are in the current Warrior. There's Belchers, Acolyte of Pain. Most control warriors nowadays don't even run Armor Smith, so that's not even a silence card. So I think you sort of have to silence the Acolyte of Pain if it's clean like this play, just because, card advantage is such an important thing in this matchup, especially for the Warrior player.
Yeah, there's very few silenced targets in the deck. So you can see Amnesiac there considered wrathing the 3/3, but really values that card draw that Wrath is going to provide later. Really wants to use it to find an Ancient of Lore or Dr. Boom, some kind of big threat. But in not wrathing, he left more minions on the board, so now that Shade is even more vulnerable to Brawl. Nostam, though, has kind of a favorable board state, excluding the Shade, so he's going to just hold off on Brawl, play a Belcher, kind of use these minions that he's already developed before having to throw out the Brawl.
We're going to see that Wrath, whether or not he chooses. So he did choose to cycle with it. Does 1 damage. He's going to swipe. That gets rid of the damaged silenced Acolyte of Pain. That guy's seen better days. And it's going to be left with a Slime and a wounded Elite Starseeker. He actually draws the map. Now, looks like he's just going to play this now. He does shuffle into his deck, and he gets to draw another card, so that's one of the upsides of that card. You're not just sacrificing something. It draws a Despite, which is a very important pickup in this matchup.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a key card, being able to deal with things like Azure Drake, Druid of the Claw with some help from a Slam or a Bash. Definitely needs to pick that up. So at this point, Amnesiac's still upset. He hasn't seen a single Ancient of Lore yet. If he doesn't manage to find one by the time he empties his hand with this Emperor Thorus and the Wrath, it's going to start looking grim for the Druid. You definitely need to draw that first card draw card and then have that hit another and just kind of chain them into each other.
Yeah, we talked earlier about how spacing your threats is important, but you need to actually have, multiple threats to play in order to keep that chain going. Having double Force of Nature in your hand early on is one of the worst things that can happen to you in this matchup in particular, because there's not going to be things that you want to clear off the board in some matchups, like against Zoo, for instance. Sometimes you can use that Force of Nature as a tool for removal, but against a Warrior, they don't really have big threats. Using Force of Nature is pretty much just a waste of a turn in the long run. So he really needs to hit those draw spells, and he might even have to resort to using that Wrath or that 1 damage in the cycle in order to just try and get deeper into his deck.
You can see Amnesiac really does not want to use that Wrath to deal 3 damage. A lot of people are wondering, well, why don't you just kill the Elite Starseeker, because that's kind of like the straightforward play here. But he's just really valuing that Wrath for the draw because he's worried he won't find Ancient of Lore.
See, Amnesiac hoping for it. Does not want to lose the Shade or, oh no, he loses the Brawl. So Elite Starseeker, a lot better of a brawler than we knew, but she does hang out in the tavern a lot, as we saw from the Whispers of the Old God cinematic, so obviously no stranger to it. And Amnesiac, I want to talk about the Emperor Thor's hand last play, though. His hand's a little bit clunky. He has that Wild Growth sitting in there. He didn't necessarily have the Savage Roars, but he did have 2 Forces of Nature. And that's usually what you're looking to discount with Emperor Thor's hand, is those combo pieces that you're going to want to close the game out.
Yeah.
You guys like that from him, or would you rather seen something else?
Well, the Force of Nature, you sort of need it to close out the game, because especially with the New Age Control Warrior, their armor totals tend to get a lot higher than they used to, because they have cards like Bash, and because they have more early game removal and their deck is more focused on removal. And that's a Doomsayer. So I think Nosam's plan was to play the Belcher, but of course, Doomsayer puts a stop to that.
Yeah, I would have liked to see him run out the Despite there, just kind of save the mana. He's going to end up playing it at some point anyway. But yeah, for Amnesiac, I do think playing that Emperor was fine. You don't really want to use your Force of Natures at any point without the combo, because since you play 2 Forces, 2 Savage Roars, there's the real threat in a long game against Warrior that you can actually combo them 2 times.
Just set up the long con lethal.
Right. We do see the cat come down. Cat is for fight. Just going to get in there. Shade come down. And Amnesiac's just at this point where he's like, all right, it's time to throw things on the board. It's time to start doing damage. See what he has for removal. That Doomsayer coming down, I wonder if that was the first time in a competitive match where the Doomsayer just came out and there was no minions on the board. It's just like, oh. I mean, he did prevent the Sludge Belcher, so he got something done.
Yeah, and that actually could end up being a big deal because, you know, that 4 damage from the Druida Claw wouldn't have gone to the face if you know, the Belcher had come out the turn previous. So the reason why Raynad said earlier that even though the Warrior deck is now built more towards beating Druid, it's still really tough because there just aren't threats. You can remove everything off the board, but the Druid is still going to have, you know, a couple minions left and combo to push through later in the game. So even though this match has seemed like it's been in Nosam's favor, it's not over. 1 agent of lore draw, combo drawn again, or combo drawn could, you know, spell bad things for Nosam if he doesn't draw into continuous ways to remove things off the board.
Right. This definitely wants to win in the later stage of the game, either through a war of attrition, through something that like that Elise Starseeker. So the Druid is definitely more than capable of putting on the pressure, and we do see the combo in Amnesiac's hand, so it's a consideration. Although Nosam's health total still way too high to be considering that just now.
Yeah, Amnesiac's plan at this point is just get this Shade to be massive and win with that. Nosam's hand is all removal, and he's telegraphing that by not playing anything with 10 mana.
Ancient of Lore off the top. That is exactly what he wanted to see. TJ, of course, predicting it with his caster powers.
Yeah, but it's actually quite late. It's exactly what he wanted to see, but it's been exactly what he's wanted to see for, you know, 5-6 turns now. So he does get it, and that's a great sign, but, you know, it would have been a lot better happening a bit earlier in this game for him.
Amnesiac's health has dropped kind of low, so if Nostam can find a Grommash, he can actually threaten lethal over 2 turns of that Despite.
I do not think he runs Grommash. I think his deck like tops out at Justicar Trueheart.
That's really surprising to hear. A lot of times you see even the more fatigue or removal-oriented warriors do play Grommash just as kind of a value minion to play when you're behind.
Yeah, it's possible, and we did see it from some of the other players throughout the weekend, but I know in particular one of Nostam's practice partners, we saw it on the screen earlier, is Muzzy, and his other practice partner, Lead Paint, who actually the last time I checked were both top 10 Legend on NA, and they both had played a version of Control Warrior with Elise Starseeker that topped out at Justicar Trueheart to get to that spot. So if it's the same list that, or similar to that list that they're running, then he's just threatless.
That's very cool.
You know who's not threatless right now is Amnesiac, as he draws that Dr. Boom, and you might be looking at home like, oh, Dr. Boom's green, it's time to play it, but he does have that Innervate, and he has some considerations to make, because if for some reason Nosam is unable to clear Dr. Boom, with what Amnesiac has in hands, that's just the end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, at this point, Amnesiac's just aware of the fact that Nostam's kind of been passing without playing anything for several turns, so he knows that Nosam's entire hand is removal, and he's asking himself, what are the odds he has Brawl, and can I win without playing this Dr. Boom? And he's decided that he's going to take the risk, not play around Brawl, develop a massive board, and just go all in here.
Is he going to use this for...
Looks like
2 damage, yeah. Wow. I was going to say, with the Despite equipped, there's absolutely no reason to get the Living Roots in. What he's doing is, I didn't count it, but I'd imagine the only reason you make that play is to set up for a next turn lethal. And,
I've got the beast in my
well, now that the armor's there, I can't go back and count it. Rewind!
Now we need the rewind on the caster desk here. Lotheb is a very, very tasty draw there.
That Innervate in Amnesiac's hand actually gives him the opportunity to draw a second Savage Roar and go for the double combo there. So he actually had an opportunity to deal massive damage had he hit it.
Yeah, he can still deal, I think, 32 damage this turn with Innervate Swipe with the combo, with what he has on the board. So he's actually pretty close to winning even with just that draw. But yeah, Savage Roar would have been the closeout. And he's still in a good spot, though. You know, Nosam does have removal, but that Shade is just super problematic. It's going to stick on the board, keep growing, keep getting him closer to combo range. And Nosam has not drawn into Justicar Trueheart, so he can't get out of reach of that Druid's damage because the 2 armor each turn is just not enough to do that.
Yeah, Boombot not quite going where Amnesiac, or not quite doing what Amnesiac would have wanted there. Curious to see second one, not too much better, so those Boombots were not the feisty kind. And
it definitely hurts to lose those minions because Amnesiac really valued the Savage Roar damage. Like, that is his goal for winning, so losing out on those is a big deal.
Acolyte Pain is a really great pickup here because it allows him to cycle into more removal.
Right.
He's going to think about it just because he was thinking if maybe it's better to shield slam because he wants to fit in the armor up, and it looks like he actually is going to execute anyway.
Yeah, Nosam just really valuing his life total at this point. He recognizes that he's ahead. Druid's running low on resources, and at this point, he's just trying not to die to combo because that Shade is getting out of control.
Yeah, that's a big old change. Shredder, not a bad pickup at all there. Reason why it's so powerful for Druids is even after you remove the initial body, does generally leave something behind. And assuming it's not Doomsayer or something like Lore Walker Cho, it usually benefits a Druid to keep it for that Savage Roar win condition Raynad was talking about.
A Savage Roar pickup that turn was lethal because 22 with double combo plus 11 from the Shade after double Savage Roar. So that was another opportunity there where Amnesiac could have picked up a lethal opportunity, but picks up a Paladin Shredder instead of the second Savage Roar.
Yeah, he's getting really close to it at this point because he has so few cards left in his deck. At this point, he can't even run out the BGH just as a minion because that Big Game Hunter has to have a target when you play it, and it's going to force him to kill his Shade.
Oh, he does run Grom. There we go.
There you go, and there's the revenge. That is going to go ahead and make the game serious 2-0 as Nostam takes it.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, man, I've never seen a Warrior deck without it. It's just so powerful.
It's there. Raven didn't believe me at the America's Winter Prelims, but it exists, I promise. But Nosam, I guess, decided to put that threat in, and he wins a game because of it.
Yeah, we weren't on the desk yesterday, TJ, but I did mention that you were a prophet calling out the prominence of this deck, and sure enough, it appears to have pretty much usurped Patron as the preferred Warrior deck. We only saw Snail, of course, bringing that Patron deck thus far. So,
I mean, in a format where you expect other people to bring Patron, Patron's a very respected deck. People know it's good. You would expect some people to bring the deck to a tournament of this caliber, and Control Warrior actually has a good matchup against Patron, so that's maybe one of the reasons that people are favoring this version.
Yeah. And the Gore Howls as well was something that I had predicted was going to be put in actually a lot longer ago than it was, which was just this weekend. But yeah, a really great performance. And one thing to note is Druid has actually been the worst performing deck so far out of yesterday and the 2 games that we played today. That brings its total win-loss record to 2-8.
Yeah, no, it's just want to say this Warrior deck has really been crushing it at this tournament thus far, and curious to see what this means for the Europe Winter Championship, obviously next week, and the Asia Pacific Championship the week after. Now, Amnesiac down 0-2. This is not a spot you want to find yourself in, but he's still a very, very skilled player. Would not expect to see him go out without a win, but let's take the chance to get to learn a little bit more about him. We've got some stats ready to go on him, and again, 15. This guy joined a professional team last year at the age of 14. Raynad, you have that experience of being a professional card game player early on in your life. Is that something that is more difficult when you're younger? Do you think it gets easier as you get older?
I think it's actually at its easiest when you're young because you really have that passion, that drive. Like, you're excited about getting to travel, playing, doing something you love for a living. It's fun. And I definitely think Amnesiac's experiencing that right now, getting to, see the country play at a tournament like this. It's a great experience.
He's not a jaded old man like we are up here on this desk.
Not yet.
Just yet. But we also saw there he practices with Firebat, Zalay, Just Saying, and these are 3 really well-known names in the Western scene, 3 very good players. So Amnesiac has certainly been brainstorming this this tournament composition for a while. He's going to go ahead and go with that Rogue deck, knowing that Nostam has to get his final win with Warlock. And this Warlock deck, I actually do not recall. I think it was more straight handlock style, wasn't it, TJ?
Nostam's?
Yeah.
We didn't see it yesterday. His Warlock deck was banned in his series versus Jockey.
Right.
So he did bring Zoo to Winter Prelims, and Nostam actually brought nearly the same lineup that he brought for prelims with class-wise, but he switched it up with Warrior, brought Patron for prelims, Control for this, and now he's switching it up with Warlock. So this is actually a really cool thing to see. He's sort of playing mind games with his opponents and punishing them for, reading too much into their research on him. So I really like that he did decide to change it up. And once again, the players just waiting for their mulligans, not trying to give any additional information to their opponent about what their hand contains.
I was going to say, it's interesting you bring that up, because if Amnesiac was expecting Zoo, then Oil Rogue is a really legitimate counter to it. Raynad, how do you think this Oil Rogue is going to fare against any of the slower Warlock archetypes?
Well, it's a very draw-dependent matchup, to be honest. I feel like this is most likely to be a Reno lock coming out of, I was going to say because of the Siphon Soul, but I think the Reno also indicates that it is, in fact, Reno Warlock.
Sure.
This is a great curve coming out from Nostam, and it is a bit of a draw-dependent matchup. I mean, there are ways that Rogue can run away with the game, but there are also kind of weaker draws that the Rogue can have, and there are some really tough to deal with threats coming out of the Warlock deck, right? Twilight Drake can be massive. Imp Gang Boss is very hard to kill efficiently. So it's really going to kind of depend on the mid-game, I think.
You can see the little smile. These two have actually been spending quite a bit of time together since they got here to the Winter Americas Championship. And I'm sure that Nostam was selling Amnesiac on the fact that his Warlock was still Zoo. So after they saw the turn 2 life tap, they looked at each other and smiled because they realized what Nostam was cooking up this whole time.
Right, you can definitely tell that while Nosam is trying to take his place as one of the upper echelon players in the Hearthstone scene, he has yet to lose that kind of fun demeanor. And he did the same thing to Chalky yesterday when he was playing that aggro shaman, and he just drew like all minions. It was double tunnel trog, double totem golem. So Nostam still has a positive attitude about all this. Now, let me ask you, why do you not play the Dark Peddler on turn 2? He chose to life tap over that right now. So what do you think?
Well, he has a Twilight Drake draw, so he's kind of trying to play this game out like a handlock. He realizes that if his life total does drop low, if he falls too far behind, all that does is enable him to play his Molten Giant, heal right back up with Reno, and have a good board state. So he did also have the option on turn 3 to play an Imp Gang Boss, which he didn't want to do because Edwin would kill it. And he also had the option to play Ironbeak Owl on Edwin, which is really the only target in the Rogue for that Owl. But yeah, again, he just really values that life tap, wants to get more resources to deal with, to work with in the early game, and just work on catching up on the board later and take advantage of all the life gain that this deck plays.
Right, that was kind of a scary situation for Nosam there for a second. 15 health, 4/4 Edwin Van Cleef on the board. You have the SI7H on the board as well, and Amnesiac had a handful of cards, and we do see that prep Tink Master, so could have been looking at a lot of damage, but we see that Twilight Drake doing work, clearing off the board. The Dark Bomb comes out as well, so this is one of those matchups where, in my experience, Nosam's just going to pretty much look to clear out the board, run the Rogue out of resources, bounce health totals, play Reno, play Molten Giants, and then there's just a point where the Rogue can no longer deal with 8/8s on the board.
Yeah, every single point of health on that Twilight Drake ended up mattering this game, so all those early life taps really paying off. At this point, Nostam's debating on the right line of play to take here because he has the option to Implosion and really go for a clean kill on Azure Drake about a third of the time. You can also just go for Shredder and kind of take the more conservative approach. I don't like letting Azure Drake live. That's the right way to play Hearthstone, Rob.
How much do you train Reynad to roll 4s on your Implosion when it really matters?
Not at all, clearly. Because I'm sitting here casting instead of playing. This is the difference right here between Reynad and pro-level players here at the America's Championship.
Is rolling 4 on Implosions, huh? Yeah, well, just get in the gym with those Implosions, do some reps, do some sets, see what you get to. But yeah, he is in a pretty commanding spot on the board, and we saw Amnesiac just kind of chuckle when he saw the 4 damage Implosion. I heard a theory that with Implosion, basically no two players are ever happy about an Implosion because either TJ, what was that? Were you telling me this?
Yeah, nobody's ever happy with Implosion because either when you roll 2, you're unhappy. When you roll 4, they're unhappy, and when you roll 3, both people are unhappy because it didn't roll a 2 or a 4. So yeah, it's just one of those cards, but it's really powerful, and especially when it rolls 4 in this case. He still had the Imp Gang Boss to trade into it, so it's not like he couldn't kill the Azure Drake if it rolled lower. But it would have been a much weaker board state had he done that.
I was going to say, this board state is strictly better than having to trade in your Imp Gang Boss. So Amnesiac has no Fan of Knives, no Blade Flurry, nothing to just conveniently clear the board. So after taking some time and deliberating on it, just goes with that piloted Shredder, goes with the backstab, does not feel very good about this at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that he chose not to clear off a Imp there. But yeah, just going to save the durability, kind of threaten potential Fan of Knives, Blade Flurry. More efficient ways to take out the Imps. Nostam in a very commanding position here. Normally the Rogue would be the deck that's kind of ahead at this stage of the game, but the Warlock had a really good curve, good threats, and yeah, Nostam's just really trying to find out the best way to leverage his position and make sure that he can't lose the game.
Yeah, and you can see actually that statistic at the top is actually really relevant. A 57% win rate, especially with Rogue, is actually really impressive considering that statistic includes the entirety of his Hearthstone ranked play statistics. So that's a really impressive win rate, and it shows that he has experience, and a lot of experience, with one of the harder decks to play in competitive Hearthstone.
Right, both him and Chestude came in here, and we were looking over their stats, and those are two players who primarily played Rogue, and it was not even close. It was just far and away they'd played thousands more games of Rogue. So these are two players who both believe in it. And Amnesiac had been saying over the course of the weekend that if you're someone who doesn't think Rogue is good, it's because you're not playing it well enough. So, bold statement, and we're going to see if he can leverage it, though. For Nostam, that Reno Jackson is just there whenever he wants it. He goes ahead, he played the Molten Giant last turn. Go ahead and get it out of his hand so that he can look into possibly playing the Reno soon, because obviously you don't really want to play it when you have a Molten Giant in hand.
Yeah, Nosam's got a really efficient Defender of Argus play here. He is going to choose to taunt both of his minions instead of just the Imp Gang, even though that does let... Okay, interesting. He's going to make this attack. Okay, he had the option to take out the SI there, but then Big Game Hunter could have traded into Piloted Shredder. He's going to do it this way, which leaves his Imp Gang boss vulnerable to the weapon, but it does mean that the Shredder is more likely to live.
Well, it looks like the Shredder is actually just going to go right back into Nosam's hand.
Take care of that. Not too many great sap targets in the Reno lock deck, so it's pretty good value, all things considered, for that card. Twilight Drake is really kind of the best target, I would say, for that card.
Yeah. Amnesiac's hands only poisons now. That's all he has, so 10 mana to activate all these poisons without preparation, and no Blade Flurry in hand, so it's kind of the stalling game now. He really needs to find a sprint, second sprint, actually get a lot more cards and start trying to piece something together. And Nosam's at 12 health, but for all intents and purposes, Nosam is at 30 health.
Yeah, well, it all depends on how greedy he decides to be with Reno Jackson, because... Oh, well, never mind. There's anti-heal bot. I was going to say, other than Siphon Soul, which isn't that great on this board because it doesn't heal that much health, is not the greatest healing tool, and the rest of his hand, besides Reno Jackson, has no healing. This allows him to play Reno, put that big card on the board, and still have Healbot as another heal after more burst comes down. Because we haven't really seen much of the burst from Amnesiac yet.
Yeah, one of the things going in Amnesiac's favor is that Rogue can threaten a good amount of burst damage just from hand, so Nostam can never really get that full 25 health, 29 health value out of Reno. He has to kind of play it early or else risk dying to burst. So that's what we saw here. Nostam plays it for 20, which is pretty good. And that's what I mean, that burst damage.
Yeah, that's 18 damage or 27 damage over 2 turns if you count the extra damage from the dagger. And even though there's 2 cards in hand, Nosam doesn't know. He might think, especially since he went all in with these poisons, that one of those cards is Blade Flurry, so he's got to be pretty scared here.
Or he doesn't because he has Acidic Swamp Ooze, and he's just going to...
Yeah, yep.
He's just going to go ahead and break that weapon more than likely. And, that's a situation where when you play Rogue, there are times where you're just kind of like, I'm going to set myself up to try to find the winning play, the correct line, and then I'm just going to pretty much say to my deck, hey, toss me a Blade Flurry and hope it happens. But we probably going to see this Acidic Swamp Ooze come down. And
yeah, Amnesiac recognized he's just really far behind this game. He made this Hail Mary play to potentially top deck Blade Flurry, win the game off of that, but Acidic Ooze is going to crush those dreams. And at this point, Nostam is very poised to take it. There's not much the Rogue can do from this position.
Yeah, I mean, he has 10 damage on board, 14 damage from hand, if you include the Soulfire. So it's just looking really grim. Sludge Belcher. Oh, and the concede comes out.
And that is going to be it. Nosam is going to take the series 3-0. Nosam has secured his spot in that top 4 now. He is one step closer to winning this tournament, winning a trip to the Hearthstone Championship Tour, or Hearthstone World Championship later at BlizzCon. So hats off to Nosam. Really looked commanding there for a guy who came in here feeling that he wasn't super confident about what he brought and how he was going to play it. Hats off to Nostam.
Yeah, that was an impressive performance. It really goes to show the preparation in his lineup. And switching things up from winter prelims where he brought Warrior and Warlock, but they were completely different archetypes, and maybe catching his opponents off guard.
Yeah, just showing the wide range of decks that he can pilot and the experience he had. Played well, had good decks. Yeah, just a very commanding set from Nostam.
All right, well, Frodan is standing by with Nostam to discuss his 3-0 victory over Amnesiac.
Nostam, I want to ask you a question. Prior to coming to this tournament, you weren't sure if you were going to be able to attend, but you didn't end up making it. Now that you're here, there were some doubters out there on the media saying it's unlikely that Nostam would make any impact whatsoever. What do you have to say in response to that now that you're through first place in the group?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people linked me that article, and it made me laugh pretty hard because I came into this tournament really confident, and I'm pretty happy that I was able to go 2-0 in my group.
You mentioned right before this interview to me that you felt really stressed. There's a lot of pressure on you to perform. Is that because you're realizing that this is starting to become a reality, that you can get top 4 and even go all the way?
Yeah, I just don't want to get my hopes up too much, but I just want to focus on the games, don't let the other things affect me, and just play the best that I can.
What does going up against Amnesiac have any difference compared to any other players? People pegged him as one of the favorites to potentially win and go through to the next round. Now that you defeated him, do you feel like the hardest obstacle's out of the way?
I definitely thought that our group was the toughest. People really respect Amnesia as a player. He's not known for making misplays. That doesn't mean, he's going to be the favorite to win the tournament, though, because you obviously have to bring the best decks, too. So I was just happy to make it out of groups.
Well, you bring the best decks. You also bring wacky decks, cool stuff. Overall, I think people were really impressed. I think that last deck was also extremely reminiscent of what we know you for, because they were mentioning, the casters were saying that you were at dinner with Amnesia, kind of hinting that you were still playing the Zoo Warlock. Were you playing that mind games even before the official match started?
Yeah, I really think I would have been in a bad position, especially if Chalky knew that I was Zoo. If he knew that I was Reno, there's no way he would have been the Warlock. So the advantage of them thinking that I was Zoo really helped me out in the first series.
Well, there you go. A masterful series, both before and during the competition. Congratulations, Nostam. You're the first person to go through in Group A. So that's going to do it over here in the Fireside. We're going to send it back over and see what the sidebar thinks of those games with Nostam versus Amnesiac.
Thank you, Frodan. Welcome back to the sidebar. Gotta say, Amnesiac, a little bit the victim of some pretty powerful draws overall there from Nostam, but what we want to take a look at is Amnesiac sort of continuing to play for his outs, and he was trying to set up situations where, even while being behind in the game, he was trying to set up situations where he could clutch it out with a couple of lucky draws of his own. So the first thing we have to take a look at is a play in Game 2 where Amnesiac really set the tone for how the next few turns were going to develop. And so you can see right here, the state of the board. Dr. Boom is in play, and a Living Roots here is just about to be cast, and he just chooses to deal the damage directly to Nostam's face instead of generating the 1/1 scorer.
Yeah, so this is essentially Amnesiac, setting up for lethal next turn with the combo, just in case Nostam cannot remove that Dr. Boom, which we see from his hand. Of course, he has a number of ways to do it, but if he had played the Living Roots for the 1/1s, it would have just automatically been killed by the Death Bite, so there was really no reason to do that. Instead, chooses to go face for the 2 damage, setting up for potential outs in the next turn.
Exactly, and that set the tone for the next few turns going onwards. Amnesiac was making decisions, trying to set up potentially a second Savage Raw draw with the Innovate that he had in hand. Chose to go with a defensive line as well to relieve some of the pressure of lethal going back the other way. But yeah, you have to say well played to Amnesiac overall. Despite being behind for most of the series, he was still fighting, he was still considering his percentages and his outs in the series, and trying to set up situations where he could still win from behind.
Yeah, made some very defensive plays, but not incorrect plays. Ended up playing a Lotheb the next turn, setting up for that double combo if he were to draw the second Savage Roar. But unfortunately, Nostam managed to top deck that Grommash on the turn that he needed it, not even knowing that if it was in his deck from Amnesiac's side of the board. So some very lucky draws on Nostam's side, but great play from both. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the highlights.